In this video, we will describe the Grade Evidence to Recommendation Framework, referred to as EtR for short. The Evidence to Recommendation Framework is used during the guideline development process to facilitate the decision-making by panel members in formulating the final recommendations. Up to this point, the guideline panel members would have reviewed the evidence profile and become familiar with the estimate of effects for the patient outcomes, as well as the quality of evidence. They must now consider additional factors that will determine what the panel's final recommendation is. The framework is presented in a table format and is used to present the guideline panel with information about these factors. The EtR table is used to record the guideline panel members' judgments and is later included in the final guideline publication to share with the users the information about the factors that were considered to develop the recommendation. This is intended to help the guideline users better understand and apply the recommendations to their practice. The EtR framework facilitates the guideline panel in moving from the evidence they have reviewed to developing the recommendation. It allows the panel to arrive at the direction of the recommendation, whether for or against an intervention option, as well as the strength of that recommendation, whether that be strong or a weak recommendation. We will now review the specific features of the Evidence to Recommendation framework, using the same example about heparin use in patients with cancer as we did in the evidence profile video. The EtR table presents the question at the top of the page, as can be seen here. Additionally, background about the health problem and rationale for why a recommendation will be helpful is included just below the question. There are 4 columns in the table. The first column lists the criteria to consider for each factor in the framework. The second column is to record the judgment that the guideline panel will need to make about each factor. The third column is to present the research evidence that is considered for each factor. And the fourth column is to record any comments and additional explanations that might be important to understand the decision of the guideline panel. The factors that are considered in the Evidence to Recommendation framework are each presented in one row. In the first row, the factor to outline is the problem, and to decide whether it is a priority problem in, let's say, a healthcare system perspective. As we scroll down the page, we will see that the second factor to consider is the benefits and harms of the options. In the second row of the EtR table, the overall quality or certainty of evidence is recorded. In the third row, the panel must consider whether there is uncertainty about how much people value the main outcomes, or in other words, the relative importance they place on the outcomes. Patients' values and preferences towards intervention options and the potential consequences of those options will have an impact on the recommendation that is made. Evidence about the relative importance of outcomes, if available, can be demonstrated with utility values that represent the quality of life, with a value of 1 representing perfect health. In this example, the guideline panel decided that there is likely to be important uncertainty, as the utility values for most outcomes range from 0 to 1. Therefore, some people would consider having a VT event as near perfect health, while others would consider it similar to death. This can be seen as some values range from 0.58 here to 0.2. As we scroll down once more, we are brought to the 4th, 5th, and 6th rows, which outline the desirable and undesirable effects, or in other words, the estimate of the benefits and harms of the intervention option, and compare the anticipated benefits with the anticipated harms. The information comes from the evidence profile. In this example, the panel decided that the anticipated desirable effects of preventing death and preventing VTE are probably not large. Going back to the evidence profile, we see that in a group of 1,000 people receiving heparin, 45 fewer would die when compared to a group of 1,000 people not receiving heparin, and 13 fewer people would experience VTE event. The panel also decided that the anticipated undesirable effects of bleeding are small. 2 more major bleeding events per 1,000 people when receiving heparin as compared to not receiving heparin. Once again, as we scroll down, we will see that the next factor is consideration of the resource use for the intervention option. In this example, The costs of heparin are outlined in the research evidence and will be obtained from a cost-effectiveness analysis if available. The panel decided that the resources required are probably not small, and that the incremental costs are not small relative to the net benefits. The last two factors considered are the impact of the intervention on health inequities, which are defined as the differences in health status or in the distribution of health determinants between different population groups, and the acceptability and feasibility of implementing the intervention option. The final judgments of each of these factors are either agreed upon by consensus or reached through a vote by the guideline panel. In the latter case, reporting the results of the votes, particularly for the strength and direction of the recommendation, will enhance the transparency of the process. As we scroll down, we will find a section at the bottom of the EtR table that helps the guideline panel integrate all of the judgments and to formulate the recommendations. The panel considers the balance of desirable versus undesirable consequences of the intervention option with respect to all of the factors that they made judgments about in the first part of the table, and the level of uncertainty the panel has about the balance of the consequences. By balance of the consequences, we mean the impact that the intervention option has on each of the factors outlined in the table. For example, on benefits and harms for a patient, on resource use, on health inequities, etc. The uncertainty the panel has about the balance of the consequences can stem from considerations such as the quality of evidence or the variability in the value people place on the outcomes. The balance of the consequences and level of uncertainty help determine the direction of the recommendation, meaning whether to recommend or not recommend an intervention option, as well as the strength of the recommendation. The strength of the recommendation is indicated as either strong or weak and reflects the extent to which a guideline panel is confident that desirable effects of an intervention outweigh undesirable effects. Strong recommendations are indicated using the word "we recommend," and weak recommendations are indicated using the wording "we suggest." Recommendations can be strong or weak, as well as against an intervention option. In this example, the panel decided that the desirable consequences, such as the potential reduction in mortality, probably outweigh the undesirable consequences, such as potential harms like major bleeding. However, because there is uncertainty about how much people value the outcomes, and the patient values and preferences are likely to differ, the panel decided to make a weak recommendation, using the wording, "the panel suggests." The panel provides this justification below the recommendation statement, which can be found right here. After coming to a consensus and recording the wording and justification for the final recommendation, the guideline panel can note additional considerations that go along with the recommendation, such as notes about a subgroup. For example, if the recommendation statement would be different for a subgroup of patients, such as those defined at high risk. In addition, notes can also be made for implementing the recommendation and suggestions about research priorities. In summary, the EtR facilitates the decision-making by a guideline panel in moving from the evidence to the final recommendation, and allows recording of judgments for a transparent process. This concludes our video about the evidence to recommendation framework.